Everyone. Welcome to Crux Ministries. This is our first podcast,
I'm David Witt.
and I'm Sarah Witt.
We've both been doing Bible studies for years, mostly in home Bible studies. I've got a bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry, and my wife Sarah.
I have a bachelor's degree in pastoral care from Oral Roberts University. Most of our work is with addicts and youth. That's primarily where we spend most of our time teaching. We work with a recovery ministry here in town, and again, for years that's the main area where we've done ministry. Um, I want to talk a little bit about our heart for this, just so you kind of get to know who we are and what we do and why we're doing a podcast and a video series. What we want to do is basically equip the church to be able to learn basics about the Bible. And what we want to do is give you these materials free of charge. The videos are free. The podcast is free, of course. If you're listening to this on podcast, there's a video that goes right along with it, and that's on YouTube. We do offer printed handouts. They will be available, and links to them will be underneath the video if you're watching on YouTube. Or you can go to our website, cruxministries.com, and get them there. We do charge a very, very minimal fee for that. That just covers our costs for the time that we take to put these together and to put the handouts together. But it's a very, very small charge. We're not trying to make a whole lot of money on this. So that's kind of why we're doing this. And feel free to use these videos or the audio with small groups, and the handouts, of course, you can certainly use in that way as well. The Bible studies that we tend to do are exegetical with an emphasis in geography and history. So we'll take the book of Genesis and we'll go through it line by line, but we'll also have lots of maps and lots of visuals that we usually use to help you understand the material. So if you're listening to this in your car, you might want to go back and watch the video just so you get all the visuals later on.
And one thing I think is especially important is to be a good Bible student requires that you also be a good history student. So again, we're going to incorporate a lot of geography, a lot of maps, but also a lot of history. Try to give you the bigger picture, what's going on at the time and in the places, or what's going on contemporaneously with the events that we talk about.
All right, so let's get started.
So since we're beginning in Genesis, I thought a good place to begin for an introduction would be the who, what, where, when, why, and how of Genesis. So first we're going to look at who the author and who the audience are for the book. Moses has always been traditionally considered the author of Genesis and really the entire Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of your Old Testament, from penta being 5, like a pentagram, 5-sided figure. Everyone from Joshua to Jesus and the apostles quote and refer to Moses as its author. I think that's significant for us to keep in mind, because that opinion is not held so widely today that Moses was its author. We'll look at that in a minute. Finally, there's also a lot of evidence within the Pentateuch that Moses wrote the text. There's actually lines and verses that talk about Moses was commanded to write down these things. There's verses that describe him reading what he has written to the people, especially in Deuteronomy. He presents to them the law again. Now, on the other hand, popular sentiment today, I would also kind of go so far as to say scholarship, because these are people with lots of acronyms in front or behind their names, but it's not terribly scholarly. But anyway, popular sentiment today does not favor Moses' authorship. This is primarily known as the documentary hypothesis. Interestingly, the most significant reasons cited for the documentary hypothesis are the fact that different names for God are used in the text of the Pentateuch, and Genesis in particular. Really, this idea began in the age of the Enlightenment. Really, it started with Benedict Spinoza in the 1600s, so about 100 years after the Protestant Reformation. But it really took off in the 1700s, the age of the Enlightenment, and has really been the popular opinion ever since. So don't be surprised if you go to a bookstore and find material that is trying to make the claim or support the claim that Moses is not the author of Genesis. But again, remember where we started this discussion. There's a lot of good reasons to believe that he is. As I said, if Jesus refers to Moses as the author, then it's a pretty good bet that Moses is the author. Now, let's look just for a minute on who the audience of Genesis is. Essentially, the audience is the nation of Israel. He, being Moses, gives to the people the origin of themselves in the story of Genesis, but also the origin of all things. So it gives you a context for who you are and what you have been called to accomplish before they embark into taking Canaan. So during the Exodus is when Moses presents this material to the people. This prepares them to enter Canaan and to begin God's plan to redeem the world through them. And of course, is what I mean by that is in keeping with the covenant that God swore to Abraham to bless the world through Abraham. There's obviously something bigger going on. We'll look at that when we get to the story of the text. But ultimately, God's plan to redeem the world came through a Messiah who was born of the tribe of Judah, of the descendants of David and Abraham. And we'll explore more of that as we go on.
I think this is a good place to mention, and again, this is just an introduction to the book of Genesis. We're not even getting into the text today, but I want to go ahead and prepare you to be thinking about this when we do get in the first couple of chapters. The book of Genesis, the whole point of the book of Genesis is to get you from the beginning of creation all of the way until the Israelites are in Egypt. It tells how they get into Egypt. And that's the point of the book. The book is not, any book is going to have a scope. And what that means is it has a purpose and it's not trying to cover everything outside of that. It's just trying to get you to understand its idea, its main idea. So even a biology textbook is not going to have a whole lot in it about physics. Even though they're both scientific documents, one is not going to, the biology textbook is not really going to help you very much with physics. So just remember when we get into the discussion about creation, that the Bible is semi-vague on that because the purpose is not to give you an in-depth explanation of how everything happened. It's to get you to Egypt. So just keep that in mind as we're going through.
So that's a little bit about the who. Now let's look at some of the what. What are the major themes of Genesis? Really, there's only two major themes, and this piggybacks nicely on what Sarah was saying. The first 11 chapters deal with what I've called the primeval history, so history before history. And finally, you have the patriarchal history, which is 12 through 50, chapters 12 through 50. So again, in keeping with what Sarah said, notice how much content is devoted to the story leading up to the Israelites being in Egypt and from whom the Israelites descend, which is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Within the story of primeval history, you have four sub-stories or sub-contexts here. You've got the creation of earth and man in the first two chapters. Then you have the judgment of man and earth in the third and fourth chapters. Chapter 5 through 9, you have the judgment of man and redemption through Noah. And in 10 and 11, the judgment of man and the creation of the nations. Once you get to patriarchal history, chapters 12 through 50, as I mentioned, you have the story of Abraham, which is 12 through 20, Isaac, 21 through 26, Jacob, 27 through 36, and finally the life of Joseph in 37 through 50. If you're able to look at the slides, you'll notice I titled these The Redemption of and Through Abraham, The Redemption of and Through Isaac, Redemption of and Through Jacob and Joseph. Because really, again, the primary story of Genesis is the story of redemption. You can almost kind of think of Genesis as Act 1 of a play. It's introducing all the key players that are going to become important for the remainder of the Old Testament. And as much as happens in Act 1 is not the primary purpose of any play. It's the Act 2 or Acts 2 and 3 where all the action really takes place. So this is kind of a primer that's setting you up for what comes in the rest of the history of the people of Israel.
Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the where, and that the question is, where does Genesis take place? Just like there's 4 sub-themes in each of the sections in Genesis, there's 4 areas in which all the action in Genesis takes place. The first one is Mesopotamia, and that is modern day Iraq. So if you have an idea, if you're looking at the PowerPoint right now, you can see these are labeled, but if you don't, just try and imagine Mesopotamia is as far in the east as Genesis takes place. Aram is up north. That's the area of Syria today. And then Canaan is modern day Israel, and then down in Egypt on the southwestern part of the map. Pretty much everything takes place in one of these areas, and you see a lot of movement early on, especially in Abram's story. He moves around through all of these areas. Actually, it's a very, very large geographical area to have to walk through. So just keep that in mind. Definitely you want to know and be familiar with each of these areas, because we will talk about them more in depth as we go through Genesis.
And they'll come up again and again.
Right.
All right, now let's talk for a moment about the when. When does Genesis take place? And there's truly only one time period that we can nail down with any degree of certainty, and that's really the age of the patriarchs. So if you think of the 4 major stories and events of Genesis, the creation of all things, including man, Adam and Eve, and the fall, and then of course the story of Noah and the nations, none of those have any specific time frame given to them. One thing you'll find is there's a history in the church with a capital C, the church in general, to try to define the dates of creation and Adam and Eve and Noah using the genealogies that are present in Genesis. That some of that stuff that's so hard to get through sometimes, that so and so begat so and he lived so many years. But that's not the purpose of the genealogies, and we'll talk about that more in a few moments. But just to reiterate, the only time frame that we know we can nail down with any certainty is really the age of the patriarchs, and that's as a result of the biblical text itself in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1. The author gives us the date of the Exodus according to the date that Solomon dedicated the temple. And that we can know with a little bit greater degree of certainty, that the year of the temple being built. From there, we can kind of go back to figure out about when the Exodus takes place, and then from the Exodus events and some other biblical texts, we can sort of go back and give us the general time frame for the age of the patriarchs, and that's approximately 2,000 years before Jesus to about 1,800 years before Jesus. So think of it this way. The age of the patriarchs is about as far away from Jesus as we are from Jesus today, 2,000 years later, because of course our modern calendar is built on the birth of Jesus. So the year's 2016. We're about 2,000 years after him. Well, the patriarchs are about 2,000 years before. For if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about dates and timing for creation in particular, Sarah and I can't recommend enough or highly enough the work of Hugh Ross, Dr. Hugh Ross. He's an astrophysicist. He has a ministry called Reasons to Believe, and you can find them anywhere on the internet. I think he's also got a Facebook page. So we just want to encourage you, if you're interested to know a lot more details about creation and Adam and Eve. He deals with that quite a bit, and I believe also a lot of the flood stuff, the flood narrative. Seek him out as a resource. Again, we can't recommend him highly enough. We love what he does.
I'll put a link to one of the most helpful videos that we have found that he has on YouTube. It was a talk that he did, and that link will also be below this video, and you'll probably want to listen to that between this video, this video and the next one, just so you'll have a little bit of a basis for what we're talking about.
So now let's look at the why of Genesis, and I asked the question, why is Genesis important? I think it's important for three primary reasons. The first reason being that it tells us of God's power, also his intelligence, his morality, and his faithfulness. If you think of it this way, if God was to create all things out of no things, that requires a great deal of power. Also requires a great deal of intelligence. Because look at the complexity of the world around us, the variety of plant and animal life, and something we can admire. I think even people who don't believe in God admire the natural world and what it has to offer. Well, think about the intelligence that this requires. Also think about the call that God gives to us to be good people. Of course, not that being good is the means of salvation, but being good is the reflection of his character, which is what he always intended us to be. Think about the fall in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So God's goodness, of course, shines through Genesis, and then finally his faithfulness. The fact that he is loyal to those whom he loves. And that will really come out strongly as we go through the text. The second reason why I think Genesis is important is because, of course, it's not only a foundational document for Israel, but in a lot of ways it's a foundational document for all of us who believe in God. It's the foundational document of creation and man, who we are, who God is, who made all these things. It's also the foundational document for the nations, that's all of us, and the nation of Israel. And finally, it's God's redemptive plan for humanity, or the beginning, I should say, of God's redemptive plan for humanity. You'll notice that the idea of redemption or redemptive, I keep using that term a lot. And that's because if you had to summarize the content of the Old Testament in one word, I think that's probably a good word to use, because God is trying to redeem the fallen world. Out of his sovereign love for us, he gave us the option to serve or not to serve him. As a result of not serving him, of course, a lot of bad things follow, and his mission was to redeem that. So redemption, of course, is the key word really for the whole of the Bible. The final reason why I think Genesis is important is because it serves as a counterpoint to Moses' other books. That's Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Genesis, we see the story of everlasting redemption by grace through faith in the life of the patriarchs. Whereas in the remainder of Moses' books, it's really a temporary redemption by means of the law, through the sacrificial system. So it's a counterpoint in that it shows a different and better way, an everlasting redemption versus a temporary one, and begins to open up themes we really see strongly in the New Testament, whereas throughout really the most of the Old Testament, we see that temporary redemption by means of keeping the law through the sacrifice. The prophets, of course, bring up the idea of you failed to keep the law, therefore God is punishing you with these things. So serves as a counterpoint in that it shows everlasting redemption, but also serves as a counterpoint in that it shows us God's unconditional covenants. Unconditional, meaning it has no conditions on it. These are apart from the law, versus the remainder of the law itself, which is, I should say, the law of Moses is a conditional covenant by means of keeping the law.
You see if then statements. So if you do this, then you will be blessed, or if you do this, then you will be cursed. Whereas the unconditional covenants, God just says, "I will bless you."
Right. Covenants is not a word we use a whole lot these days, but we still practice them. So for those of you for whom this term might be unfamiliar, marriage is a covenant. You stand up, you make a solemn oath to one another. There's a sign of the covenant, which is the rings, and then you're expected to go out and to keep your promises. In the unconditional covenants, it's rather interesting because as we think of covenants even today, it's two people making promises to one another. In Genesis, we see God making promises to his people, but the people are not required to make promises in return. So again, that really emphasizes God's love for us and that redemptive plan that I was speaking of earlier. And again, once we get to the text of Genesis, we'll see lots and lots of cases of that. Now, finally, we're going to conclude by looking at how is Genesis structured. Many books, in fact, I would argue probably every book of the Old Testament, and some of the ones in the New Testament for sure, are always structured around a key word. Remember that the chapters and verses that we see in our modern Bibles are not part of the original text. You know, when Moses sat down, he didn't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write chapter 1, verse 1 now. Instead, at the time period, and is evident from the text itself, we see that key words are important. And the key word for Genesis is the Hebrew term toldot, which is translated in our modern Bibles, generally speaking, depends on which translation you have, as generations. So you'll see a phrase that'll come up again and again, and if you have access to the video, you can see the slide that pulls out each of these. The toldot, or this is the account of the heavens and the earth in the day they were created. That's Genesis 2:4. So that begins almost a new chapter. If you think about the expression, this is the account of, it sounds like he's starting something new. Then you get to chapter 5, verse 1 of Genesis. This is the account of Adam. Then chapter 6, verse 9. This is the account of Noah. So each of these is like a snippet, a small picture, a small story that he's conveying in a collection of stories. There are 10 of these toldots. You can find them in many commentaries, and I've run across them. This is not original to me, but I think this is key to understanding how Moses wanted you to read the book. And in fact, when we go through our PowerPoints and through our podcasts, we're going to try to do them as toldot chapters. So the first podcast will be the toldot of creation, which is not called the toldot, but anyway, 1:1 to 2:3. and then the second one will be 2:4 to 4:26. Some of them are too long to do in one podcast, but we're going to focus on them under the heading of this is the account of the generations of so and so. There's also a secondary structure that shows up, and again, if you have access to the PowerPoints, you can see it there quite evidently. As I said, there's 10 major sections, but then there are also 10 minor sections. They all start with the phrase, these are the sons of, or these are the families of, or the names of. And again, they come in and end. Generally, I believe most of them are just kind of snippets as transitions. So they're transitioning you from one Toldot to another one. It's rather interesting. They're arranged in three primary groups. You have the heavens and the earth, Noah, or Adam, then Noah, then Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and then there's three of these subtexts. And then he goes through another family and a subtext, and then another family and a subtext. Again, keywords are always important, and as hard as it is for modern folks to understand the Old Testament, part of the key is understanding where the key phrases are. And then the book starts to break down, and it makes a little more sense that way. Well, this concludes our first podcast. As Sarah said at the top, we have a webpage, so feel free to leave comments or questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And in the meantime, may God continue to bless and keep you.